Okay, so we're in the middle of chapter 8, and we're just finding out that Mrs. Lockton wants to use Ruth as like her personal slave. So she's going to dress her all up, and that's going to kind of show that Mrs. Lockton is a very important lady. But Isabel's not happy about it. I went cold with anger, and then hot, and then cold again. It wasn't right. It wasn't right for one body to own another, or pull strings to make them jump. Why was Madame allowing to hit me? Why was Madame allowed to hit me or treat Ruth like a toy? Take care, Becky warned, pointing to my lap. I looked down. My hands were clenched into fists so tight that the cords that held my bones together could be seen, and I released them. Becky leaned across the table and spoke quiet. I don't imagine you like this much. Can't say as I blame you. But don't lose your head. Madame is not afraid to beat her slaves. I rubbed my palms together. Do they own more than us? Half a dozen down to the Charleston place, none up in Boston. Never been to the Carolinas, so I don't know how they get along. But you need to calm yourself and heed what I'm about to tell you. Yes, ma'am, I said stiffly. 2-3 years ago, there was another girl here, slave like you. She talked back to Madame Lockton. Madame called her surly and took to beating her regular like. One day she beat her with a fireplace poker. Did she die? No, but her arm broke and didn't heal right. It withered and hung useless. So Madame sold her. I could not hold the hot words in my mouth any longer. She best not come after me with a poker or hurt Ruth. Becky leaned back and studied on me a bit. You ain't never going to say something like that again. Not in my kitchen. I get paid decent here, and I won't let some girl like you get in the way of that. Wearing pretty dresses ain't going to hurt the little one, so wipe that look off your face and fetch me some more wood. After that, Ruth's every waking moment was spent with Madame. Though we worked in the same house and slept under the same blanket, we had little time to talk. Ruth was permitted to sleep until the sun rose, went to bed when Madame retired, and rarely had to work in the kitchen or garden. I lay awake every night, heart filled with dread, recalling the dangerous offer made by the boy in the floppy red hat. Curzon. That offer's looking better and better to Isabel. Okay, we're going to go into chapter 9. So now we're on to Thursday, June 6, 1776. I was stuck on the back steps with a pile of dull knives and a whetstone. It was a dreary job. First, you spit on the stone. Next, you hold the knife at the proper angle and circle it against the stone, 10 to the left, 10 to the right, until the blade was sharp enough to slice through a joint of beef like it was warm butter. As I sharpened, I imagined using the knife to cut through the ropes that tied us to New York. I'd slice through the ocean, and Ruth and me would walk on the sand all the way home. 10 circles to the left. Ruth was above stairs, standing by whilst Madame prepared herself for company. The master was locked in his library. Becky was somewhere in the crowd watching General Washington parade down Broadway with 5 regiments of soldiers. The sounds of beating drums and whistling fifes and the cries of "Huzza, huzza!" blew toward me over the rooftops. I pushed everything out of my mind save my task. 10 circles to the right, 10 circles to the left. Becky came back from the parade an hour later, overflowing with stories. She nattered on about the spectacle whilst assembling the tea things for Madame and Lady Seymour, who had come again to call. I pretended to listen. Truth be told, I didn't notice when she left, carrying the tray. 10 circles to the left, 10 circles to the right. All make the blade sharp and mighty. 10 circles to the left, 10 to the right. Becky called for me twice before I even heard her. Her voice was high and tight. I said to hurry. You want to get me put on the street? Madame wants you in the parlor. The knife slipped from my hand. Is it Ruth? No, The Lady Seymour wants to see you, and the master just arrived with gentlemen friends, all calling for food and drink. Now hurry!" I washed up in the cold water bucket, quickly pinned up a clean apron, checked my kerchief to make sure it was on proper, and followed Becky to the parlor. She rapped lightly on the door and pushed it open. "The new girl, ma'am," she said, setting a plate of fresh-baked strawberry tarts on the table. "Show her in," Madam said. Becky waved at me to enter. Madam and an older woman sat at the table, but my eyes were drawn behind them to my sister, dressed up as a madam's pretty pet in a bleached linen shift, a navy blue brocade short gown, and a full skirt patterned with lilacs. When she saw me, she clenched her hands together and bit her lower lip. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. My belly went funny and my mind raced. Why had she been crying? Was she sick? Scared? Did Madam hurt her? Becky poked me gently in the back. This was not the time for questions. I quickly dropped into a curtsy, bowing my head. When I stood up, the older woman, the lady aunt with all the money, gave me a shadow of a smile. She was smaller than Madam, and wore a silk gown the color of mourning dove and gray lace gloves. Her hair was curled high and powdered snow white. A necklace set with black stones shone from her neck. There were deep lines at the corner of her eyes and around her mouth, but I couldn't tell if they were from laughing or from crying. She turned in her chair and looked at Ruth, then back at me. "And these two girls are sisters?" she asked. Madam reached for her tart. "That's what the man said." The older woman sipped her tea. "What is your name, girl?" she asked me. "Isabel, ma'am," I said. "Isabel Finch." "Ridiculous name," Madam said. She opened her fan and waved it in front of her face. "You are called Sal Lockton now. It's more suitable for you." I forced myself to breathe in slow and regular, instead of telling her that my name was not her affair. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She glanced at my feet. "And you must wear shoes. This is a house, not a barn." Ruth stepped out of her corner. "Isabel?" Madam snapped the fan shut and rapped it against the edge of the table, startling us all. "What did I tell you about silence?" she said roughly to Ruth. Ruth raised one shaky finger to her mouth and said, "Shh." "Precisely." Madam set the fan in her lap and reached for a piece of sugar with silver tongs. When she plopped it in the cup, the tea overflowed into the saucer. Ruth stood there like a carved statue, her fingers still held to her lips. I took another breath, slower than the first, and tried not to think on the newly sharpened knives on the kitchen table. Lady Seymour curled her fingers around the teacup, her gaze marking first Madam and then Ruth, then me. She said nothing. "Would you like Sal to serve you and Lady Seymour while I wait on the gentleman?" Becky asked. "Absolutely not. Show her the library and make sure the men are fed, and bring fresh tea. This has already gone cold." We curtsied and left the parlor. Ruth's sad eyes followed me to the door. 10 circles to the left, 10 circles to the right. All makes the blade sharp and might. This is what Isabel, who's now Sal, is thinking. Back in the kitchen, Becky took a large silver tray off a high shelf in the pantry. "Hold this," and she loaded the tray with plates of cold sliced tongue, cheddar cheese, brown bread, and a bowl of pickles. I could not stop thinking about the way Ruth had jumped when Madam shouted, nor the tears in her eyes. Becky took down a second tray and set upon it 4 goblets, 2 bottles of claret wine, and a crock of mustard. She swung the kettle back over the fire to heat up more water, picked up the tray and with wine, and said, "Hop to." I followed her to the front of the house. "But what about my shoes?" I asked. The masters won't notice long as he gets his grub," Becky said as she balanced the edge of the tray on her hip and knocked on the door on the right side of the front hall. When a deep voice answered, she opened it. Lockton looked up as we entered. "Oh, good sustenance," he said. pushing aside a stack of newspapers to clear off the desk. The room was the same size and shape as the parlor, but two of the walls had bookcases built into them. A large painting of horses jumping over a high hedge hung on the third wall. A thin layer of dust lay over everything. The front windows were open, bringing in fresh air and noise from the street. Carts rolling over the cobblestones and church bells in the distance mingled with the voices of the four men who sat around the enormous desk. One man looked poorer than the others. The cuffs of his coat were frayed, and his hands were stained with ink. Next to him sat a man with a suspicious gray eye and a liver-colored coat with a double row of gold buttons fastened over a large pudding belly. The third man wore something on his head that looked more like a dead possum than a wig. But his coat was crisp and new, and the buckles on his shoes gleamed. The fourth was Master Lockton, looking like a cat who had just swallowed the last bite of a juicy mouse. Becky set her tray on a sideboard. I held mine as she poured the wine and served the gentlemen. Then she had me hold the food tray so that she could serve the tongue and cheese. Talk halted as the men started in on their meal. "Becky," Madame called from across the hall. "Go see to her," Lockton told Becky. "The girl can stay here. Does she know where the wine is?" "Yes, sir," I said. Becky and Lockton both stared at me. I had spoken out of turn. My job was to be silent and follow orders. Ruth had already learned that. "Shh," I said to myself. "Keep the wine flowing and the plates full," Lockton said. "My friends eat more at my table than their own." As Becky left, Gold Buttons drained his wine and then raised his goblet. I hurried to pour him another and topped off the drinks of the other men. Lockton gave me a curt nod when I was finished. "Stand over there," he said, pointing to the corner where the two bookshelves met each other. I gave a wordless curtsy and took my place. The men dove back into their conversations. "Who has been arrested because of the oath?" demanded Lockton. "Fools unschooled in the art of fence-sitting," said Gold Buttons. "Plank walking, you mean?" said Ink-Stained. Shabby Wig leaned forward and pointed his finger at Ink-Stained. "Don't you turn the coward on us, not when we're this close." "Close?" argued Ink-Stained. "Do you see His Majesty's ships in the harbor? I don't. I might argue that England has fled and the rebel traitors have won." "Lower your voices," Lockton said with a scowl. He closed the windows with a loud bang and then returned to his seat. "His Majesty's ships are very close, closer than you know. This rebellion will be smashed like glass under a heavy boot, and the king will be very grateful for our assistance." So now we know Lockton is working for the king. The mention of the king caught my ear. I studied the wide boards on the floor and listened with care. Gold Buttons popped a piece of cheese into his mouth and talked as he chewed. "I sincerely hope you speak the truth, Elihu. These rebel committees are multiplying faster than rabbits in the spring. They've just about ground business to a halt." "Have they interfered with you directly?" Lockton asked. "Every waking moment," Gold Buttons said. "The latest bit of nonsense is a committee to detect conspiracies. They have sent the hounds after us, old friend." "Have you written to Parliament? They need the specifics of all our difficulties." "Parliament is as far away as the moon," complained Ink-Stained. As the other men argued about Parliament and letters of protest and counter-letters and counter-letters, Shabby Wig stabbed at the last pieces of tongue on his plate and shoved them into his mouth. He turned in his seat to look at me, held up his plate, and grunted. If I had ever done such a thing, Mamma would have switched my behind for having the manners of a pig. Even Miss Mary Finch had asked with a please and a thank you when Mamma served her dinner. This is New York, I reminded myself as I crossed the room and took the plate from his hand. The rules are different. I loaded his plate down with the last slices of tongue and set it in front of him before retreating to my corner. Everything here is different. All right, I'm going to stop there. So Isabel has kind of renamed all of the men there, like Ink-Stained and Gold Buttons and Shabby Wig. So she's given them all nicknames. But she is starting to listen to what's going on in that room. And who knows if she's going to pass that on to Curzon. We'll find out.